Yo, what's going on, everybody? Welcome into another episode of Till Mets Do Us Part. We are live on YouTube, live on Twitter, like we are each and every single week. Although this week, just a bit later because I tweeted out something earlier today like a moron, and it wound up being the perfect sort of bad omen for the Mets game in more ways than one. From the show account, if you follow us over at Till Mets Do Us Part on Twitter, I said, hey, we're live at 5:30 Eastern today, or after the Mets game, if the Mets game goes long, but I don't think that will happen. Well, that's exactly what happened, and here we are going live about 15 minutes or so after the game ended. So thanks to everybody who is tuning in live a little bit later than usual as the New York Mets lose the rubber game to the Houston Astros. They dropped 2 of 3, of course. Max was great. Justin Verlander was mediocre. And Tyler McGill was a heaping pile of dog shit. We're going to get into all of that and more. Of course, interacting with the show live here on YouTube is the perfect way to make sure that you're a full-fledged member of the show, no matter what you want to say. We see the comments in real time, like from Jeff Cohen saying, ready for the therapy session. Yes, you are. John Sapanaro out in Los Angeles, California. Matt Ibby Ibanez holding it down back in New Jersey. Ibby, let's talk about the hat instead of asking you how you feeling, man. Let everybody know what's going on. Your hat game is always strong, but this one is unique. Mets fans may not recognize this one, and with good reason.
Yeah, I work with a very good friend of mine. Today was also the last day of school here, so I got a couple days to myself before I get the summer job working. But today was the last day, and one of my really good friends, who I worked with for the last decade there, is moving on. He's going to a different school, so I'm wishing him all the best. But he's also a huge Houston Astros fan. He got me this hat. I've worn this before on the show because I thought it was a cool hat. He got me this hat when he went to Houston because I always thought that the Space Cowboys hat, their AAA affiliate, was a cool hat. He got it for me as a gift.
It is a cool hat.
And he said, let's put a little on the game. I'm like, why not? What the hell? And Mets lose the series, so I say on the show I'll make sure I rock the hat to pay up on my end. And like I said, it's his last day too, so that'll be pretty cool. So when he checks this out, he'll be able to see that I did pay up on it. But yes, this is the Space Cowboy AAA affiliate hat of the Houston Astros, who just beat our New York Metropolitans, because it's always so normal for a team to constantly score, 6, 7, 8+ runs and still lose because, that's what we do. Because
Mets have a losing record, Ibby, when they score 6 runs or more.
Yeah.
It's almost fucking impossible.
It's pathetic. And I know that I don't have the stat in front of me, but I know that they had like something upwards of like a 75-5 record last year when they scored 6 or more runs or something along those lines from last year. But yeah, other than that, that's why I'm wearing this hat today. So it's a little bit different than my norm. And it's I said it in the comments before we started. I'll just start right here. I'm very tired. I'm very tired in the sense of I described it as a yo-yo. I've been saying that in our Facebook community. I've been tweeting it a little bit too. I feel it's just like up, down, up, down. Then you get that good sleep on a yo-yo. It's like, there it goes. You got that good sleep. And that's kind of what the Mets do when they lose 5 in a row or 7 of 10 or whatever it is. And then you come back up and down and up and down. It's just like you get tired of just doing that same old routine. But this team just, I don't know, John. I just feel very, very blah about this team.
Yeah, look, I mean, there's a lot of people in the comments. Shout out to Patty and NYC, Chris Ferraro, Keith Blacknick, Jeff Cohen. We have the Frank the Tank impersonator, the Frank Fleming impersonator. If you see the comments in real time, then shout me out. I shouted you out. I'd like to think that this podcast has gotten big enough for one of two things, Ibby, for there to be the real Frank the Tank in the comments, and or for there to be a Frank the Tank impersonator because they know how I feel about Frank the Tank, and that person is joining in. So either way, I think we're trending in the right direction. Chris Ferraro saying it's another Frank prank, LOL. And Stevie Mack saying, hello, darkness, my old friend, which I think should have been the title of this episode. Had I not written the title last night, I think it might have been, but you can still write that as the title.
I'm definitely going to use that for the name of the audio, the podcast version of the show. I will definitely use that one. So shout out to you, Stevie Mack, for providing us with this week's episode title.
Yeah, and of course, the podcast drops tomorrow, courtesy of the Premier Podcast Network, the new podcast home of Till Mets Do Us Part, and also the Goddamn Jets, which is my other show. That episode dropped today. Ibby, look, I don't know. I don't know where to start, honestly. You said you're tired. I'm exasperated. Joe K says, I've gotten to the point in the season where I'm content possibly not making the playoffs. I'm enjoying them actually putting up a fight. There is so much to unpack with this Mets team, right? We have some good with Max kind of, doing his thing, having after arguably, or not even arguably, 2 starts ago, Max Scherzer has his worst start as a New York Met. He follows that up with his best start as a New York Met. And that's kind of the way this has gone. And you hope you can get some consistency. Justin Verlander wasn't bad. I mean, it was basically to the tune of 1 swing where he gives up the 2 runs on the 3-0 pitch. And Bregman hits one into the Crawford boxes. But you know what? 4 runs, 7 innings from Justin Verlander is not enough to get it done the way this team is right now. Not when he's got, outings where he's given up 7 runs and 8 runs and all this bullshit from earlier in the year. You're sitting there. I know the Astros are not 100% right now, and they're not as good as they were when they opened the season. They're missing Yordan Alvarez, but they're still a good team. So if you're sitting there and you say, look, Verlander went 7, gave up 4 runs. One of them was on 2 of them were on a 1 swing. You say that's a pretty good start, and I'll take that. You want better from Verlander, but you'll take that up against
a game you could win.
Team in baseball. That is a game you could and should win.
Yes,
but that's not good enough. Not with this Mets team right now. What Tyler McGill gave them today, certainly not good enough. Absolutely an abomination. And the Mets cannot find any level of consistency. And I tweeted this yesterday. And I said, look, on the show last week, we talked about, I don't care what the excuse is. I'm not ready to call him washed, but Max Scherzer needs to be better. And Max Scherzer was better. So I want to give credit where credit is due. That is a damn fine pitching line against a damn good team. 8 innings, 4 hits, 1 earned run, 1 walk, 8 Ks. Verlander on the flip side, not as good, right? But again, a game that you could conceivably win.
You could fight to win that. Yeah, you definitely could. It doesn't help when you're facing, in my opinion, one of the best arms in the AL in Framber Valdez. And everything was just, look, we're not taking anything away from Framber because, like I said, he's fantastic. Everything was just dropping out the bottom of his pitches last night. They couldn't touch him. They couldn't lay off of him. And, of course, he induces so many ground balls as it is. But it's a game where you expect a little bit more fight, some better at-bats. I know, like I said, everything was dropping out the bottom, but you could definitely have some better plate appearances, and it wasn't there. And it's, like I said, it's exhausting to watch. It really is. And I don't even know, like, we didn't really even say, like, where to really begin with this conversation. Like, where do you want to go in terms of what to talk about with this team? Like, how far do you want to move it? Where do you want to go?
I think it's this. I think we've seen enough now with the Mets with a losing record when they score 6 or more runs, including today. When you get the dominant outing that you got from Max Scherzer, when you get a decent, I'm going to say middle of the road, not a quality start, certainly, outing from Justin Verlander going up against an excellent pitcher, one of the best in the AL in Valdez. That's a game they didn't win, but they could win. And then you have the absolute, like, I think this series is emblematic of what the Mets have done this year. Mm-hmm. They have been woefully inconsistent. And they've, as a team, and they've been woefully inconsistent, if not worse, in the starting pitching. We have to give credit where credit is due. A guy that I said was a candidate to be designated for assignment and be off this team, Tommy Pham, that's what he's done in the month of June. That doesn't count today. That was last night's game. He's been an everyday player, Ibby.
Yes.
He's been playing against righties. He's been playing against lefties, and he's hitting against both of them. There's a person that you and I have talked about largely on this show, and Mets Twitter has taken to task, and we both finally came around and said, look, if they want to cut bait from Vogelback, now is the time to do it. They had the opportunity to do it. We joked about why he has so much leash and leeway and why they gave him 7 days off like he's, a former great player. Well, You know what? Whatever they did seems to have worked. Vogelback was 3 for 4 today. Vogelback knocked in 3 runs. He almost hit a grand slam, came within a few feet of hitting a grand slam in a big spot. He's also hit a couple home runs over the last couple weeks. He's become the kind of player that he's always been on the back of the baseball card, which is why I argued earlier in the season that you can't cut bait from these guys, on May 1st and on April 25th and on May 15th, because odds are they will regress to the mean, whether they're playing over their heads or if they're playing completely in the dumps. But I say all that to say, Ibby, there was a lot of debate at the beginning of the season where the problems with this team were. Is it the offense or is it the starting pitching? And I think those debates now are dead. You said it about a month and a half ago that the Mets are scoring at about the same rate that they were last year. Correct. The difference was they were giving up a little over, I think it was a run and a half. At that
point, they were pitching. The previous season, they were pitching to about just under a 2.5 ERA, and at the time when I said that, they were pitching upwards of over 5.
Okay, and I think now, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but it feels like it's gotten worse, because since the moment you said that about a month ago, the offense is clearly not the problem. Because how many games? I said they have a losing record, scoring 6 or more. Correct. How many of those games have been in the last month?
Right. Yeah.
So the offense is holding up its end of the bargain.
And it
doesn't matter. I'm sorry. It doesn't matter if it's Pete Alonso being Pete Alonso. It doesn't matter if it's Francisco Lindor leading all shortstops in RBI and extra base hits. I don't care about the batting average. He's uber productive. Those 2 guys are the ones that make the offense go, right? It doesn't matter if it's them. It doesn't matter if it's Brandon Nimmo, who's had a good year. It doesn't matter if, look, here comes Mark Canha having a good, 6-week stretch, 4-week stretch. Here comes Eduardo Escobar, who's contributing in a part-time role. All of a sudden, we show the numbers from Tommy Pham. Since the beginning of the season, he's producing. Over the small sample size that he's been back, Daniel Vogelback is producing. They called up Alvarez. He's producing. Brett Beatty, a little bit of mixed results, but very good for a young player. He's producing. Jeff McNeil not having a McNeil year, but it's not like he's hitting 240 like Tiki Barber thinks he's hitting. He's hitting 275. Guy's hosting Afternoon Drive. You can't do one Google search to find out what Jeff McNeil's batting average is. You can find it in 2 seconds. I promise. I've done it. But you got Starling Marte, who looks like he's finally healthy and becoming more of the guy that we had last year. Ibby, throughout the lineup, they are producing. The kids, the veterans, the stars, the pros, whatever words you want to use. The offense is holding up their end of the bargain. The starting pitching is an absolute embarrassment. And that is my monologue as to where we need to start and what this show needs to be about.
To continue that point, I said this a couple of weeks ago, talking about, where the team was at this time last year versus now. Right now, they're 34 and 40, which is pathetic. 34 and 40.
Pathetic.
Last year, at this time, they had over, I don't have it in front of me like the exact, because I did this last night, so I'll say last night's numbers instead. Last night, by the time they had 39 losses last year, they had 67 wins. 67 wins at this time in comparison to 34 right now.
That's bad.
In terms of, the losses, I should say. So you can see, and again, the offense is almost in lockstep in comparison year over year. And it's the pitching. And we can talk all we want about how the pitching, on how the hitting is doing its job. And the young kids are showing out. Of course, we want to see a little bit more from Beatty, lift the ball a bit more, but Alvarez is there. We're seeing some things that we like. Lindor, Alonso, streaky, sure, but upswing, like Keith just said in the comments. Yeah, it's a good thing. But I hate to just sound like this, but does it matter? Does it matter when you can score 6, 7, 8 runs, but you lose because you gave up 10 runs? When your bullpen is pitching to over a 5 ERA, does it matter? Because guess what? There's nothing like everyone wanted to sit back and scream about the Vogelbacks of the world and Tommy Pham in the beginning and Eduardo Escobar in the beginning and be like, hey, we want Alvarez, we want Beatty, we want Vientos, we want Mauricio, we want these guys. You don't have that where it matters right now because there's nothing down low in terms of pitching that can help this team be rejuvenated. So it's like, where are you getting the help that you need? I like Mike Vassell. Is he the savior? No. Would I like to see him at some point this year? Yeah, I think he'll be up here at some point. They just moved to AAA. He'll be up here at some point.
Yeah.
Okay. Dominic Hamill, not yet. Calvin Ziegler, have no idea. Nope. Matt Allen, dead. Blade Tidwell, nowhere near. So it's like there's nothing down low. And like we joke, and I know Ant's in the comments, and he was saying it before. I think it was that. Correct me if I'm wrong, Ant. I believe he's the one who said, just call up this guy. I clicked on the picture. It was Joey Lucchesi. It's like, but like that's where we are. It's like we're clamoring for Joey Lucchesi to come up.
And in all seriousness, Joey Lucchesi right now is a better pitcher than Tyler McGill. Tyler McGill's ERA for the season is over 5. Joey Lucchesi's is about a run lower. He's also been lights out in AAA. He also had the one start this year that's better than any of the starts that Tyler McGill was able to put together. Now, is that the kind of pitcher Lucchesi is? No, but right. I do think you have to call him up. But I also agree with you. I think it's a no-brainer to call up Lucchesi and go in that direction. But I also agree with you. This is what we're doing. Joey Lucchesi's a good major league pitcher, but that's it. He's not going to save it for you. And Ibby, here's the frustrating part for me. And Jeff Cohen just saying, we want pitching. Yeah. Following it up by saying, frustrating getting a lead or coming back to tie and then giving it up the next inning.
Yeah.
Look, I believe.
Nothing's safe.
I believe in my heart of hearts that Max Scherzer is not done. I don't think Max Scherzer is as bad as he has been pitching to this point, last start notwithstanding. I believe truly that Justin Verlander is not washed up. I do not think he is as inconsistent as he's been, a little up, a little down. I think these two guys are going to figure it out over the course of the season. Mm-hmm. And I think that we're going to go as far as the two aces will take us. However, it is no longer May 15th anymore.
Correct.
They might be digging themselves into a hole where if Justin Verlander and Max Scherzer put it together, it's not going to matter because no one else is picking up the slack and it gets late early. And I know people have said that in the comments over the last several weeks and months. But again, it's one thing to say, oh, it gets late early and it's May 15th. And you're like, dude, just let's all take an exhale. The season's 6 weeks old. It's almost July.
Yes.
These guys need to start to step up. And I'm worried that even if they do, and I believe that they will, I think Max and Verlander have a run in them. But if they're not getting help from anybody else, Cookie Carrasco keeps throwing 3 innings, and Tyler McGill keeps throwing 3 innings, and whoever, and Senga throws a lot of pitches. Senga's been very good. Arguably, he's been our ace this season. Mm-hmm. But if he keeps walking guys and pitching to a high pitch count, it's not going to matter. We're waiting for Jose Quintana to come back. It's not going to matter. Quintana's a good pitcher. I don't know what we're going to get from him. Who the hell knows? But it's not going to matter. It won't make a difference. And that's the frustrating part for me when I look at the landscape of this team. And that's why it was frustrating for us to lose the Justin Verlander game. I know Valdez is great. And I know if you give up 4 runs, you're probably not going to win that game because he had a perfect game through 5 innings. So the odds of you scoring enough to beat him is going to be tough.
Yeah.
But that's when you need Verlander to be a bit better because going the next day is Tyler McGill. And his start against the Cardinals was great. But the Cardinals are one of the worst teams in baseball. Now, I know offensively they're a bit better than that. But it's just not enough. It's none of the players that we're mentioning, none of the pitchers are giving us enough. If Tyler McGill was league average, great. If Cookie Carrasco was league average, great. If you got Kodai Senga pitching a little bit above league average in his first year, I'm good with that. If you've got Max and Justin doing what Max and Justin do, then you're in good shape. But if you've got these guys that can't even give you length. And I see the comments flooding in right now about the bullpen, and we'll talk about the bullpen in a second. And Subway to Shea, Aunt Rivera saying this bullpen makes Benitez look like Mariano Rivera, and that's a fair point. But it's a chicken and egg situation. It'd be how much better can the bullpen be when the starters go 3 innings? At least Max gave you 8 in a great start, and at least Verlander gave you 7 in a mediocre start. He went out there and he gave you depth.
Well, it also shows you
7 is okay.
Yeah, it also shows
6 runs
you
in 3 is bullshit.
Yeah, it shows you also that it's like, you had Max and JV do their job in terms of innings to basically give the pen a little of a breather, but then you roll out a fresh pen in this game, which you're probably banking on. It's probably gonna have to be used because McGill hasn't been that good, and you see what happens. Doesn't matter if they're fresh or not. Now, look, we're getting to that point where even if, and I hear what you're saying, I don't think that Max and JV are washed at all. I think they're going to be fine in terms of what they produce. But the thing that sucks and the thing that's going to hurt this team moving forward is the fact that it is June 21st, and I feel that this bullpen is fried. I really do. And you look at it moving forward, it's just like this is what I mean. It's like it doesn't matter what you do because there's nothing to get right now. There's no help within your farm system to come up right now. So it's like you're going to keep on using these guys, and I think they're worn out. I think they are fried. I really do. And it's only June. And this is what happens when you have older guys where they get a little banged up like Max and JV were, and you have guys that don't perform like the McGills and the ups and downs of a Luke Casey or whoever else, and Sanga throwing a lot of pitches, like all these different things, no Quintana, like all these different things, they add up. And a marathon that is a season of 162, it wears on you 1,000%, and it's showing in what happens here. And it's that's why I have a hard time really pulling many, if any, positives, because I'm looking at it and I'm saying I don't see how this team can find a rhythm because I think they're sucking wind. That's what I truly think. The offense can do enough. I believe that. But the pitching, I think, is just, I don't think it has it. That's just specifically the pen. I don't think it's there.
Keith saying, who's more fried, the pitchers or the fans? I think it's pretty close.
It's close.
I think it's very, very close. And this is a great comment from Joe K. And the reason why I bring it up, it's twofold. Joe K says, why would Buck take Robinson out after only throwing like 9 pitches on Sunday? Buck has to stop being obsessed with thinking ahead to the next game. The reason why I think that's a great comment is twofold, Ibby. I think he's 100% right on one side. I think in a vacuum, Buck has to realize that every game now is critical. You have to win a game that you can win. And so you need to think about that. Now, I'm not saying you mortgage the entire future.
No, of course
not. But you can't go, oh, he looked good, 9 pitches, boom, we'll have him for next game. The Mets are in a spot right now where they need to win. They need to win more than they lose at a very, very, very big pace. So you have to win those games. Now, I'm not saying you treat every game like it's Game 7 of the World Series because you can't do that with this much of the season left.
No.
But Stevie Mack says it, the way they're playing right now, there is no tomorrow.
100%.
You have to play with a little bit more urgency. Last year, Buck didn't really have to do that. Things were going their way.
Everything just
clicked.
So
he could manage differently. So I think that's a fair criticism. And I think Buck's issues with bullpen management, not just with the Mets, but over the course of his career, are something that you can raise a red flag about. So I think that's a fair comment from that standpoint. But the other reason why I think it's an interesting comment is because of everything that you just said. Because Buck knows better than you, better than me, better than everybody in the comments, there is no help right now coming from the minor leagues. So you have to, a little bit, think about overusing these guys. Because I, like you, think these guys are fried. And so sometimes when he takes out Robertson after throwing only 9 pitches, I don't know if the logic, to Joe K's point, is, oh, I'm thinking about saving him for tomorrow. I think I'm thinking about saving him.
Yeah.
Period.
Yeah.
Because
that's a good point.
You know what I'm saying? Like,
no, I get you.
And so I don't mean to speak out of both sides of my mouth there. And I don't mean to put Joe K's comment down, because again, at the beginning, I think he's spot on.
Yes.
But I think the logic goes a little deeper than that. I think that sometimes he's not playing for tomorrow, or it's not that he's holding a guy back for tomorrow. He's just like, damn, it's a good thing Robertson got out of this inning with 9 pitches. Now I can go elsewhere, and hopefully these guys aren't dead. You know what I mean? Like, that's what it's become for Buck. Because we're at the lightning in a bottle phase, Ibby. We're at Walker and Hartwig and hoping that, Brigham is good, and, Dominic Leone's been good, but then today he gives up 4 runs. He was pitching to like a 1.3 ERA before today.
Yeah.
But you keep putting these guys in, that's going to happen. And Dominic Leone is not a good pitcher. Like, he's not a highly touted pitcher, I should say. And so, the more meaningful innings he pitches, the more he's going to get exposed. And that's what they're dealing with. Carlos isn't in the chat, but that's what Carlos always says. Why can't you should have used Rayleigh. You can't use Rayleigh in the 5th inning. Who's going to pitch the 7th? Why did he go to Ottavino? He's the guy you have to go to in the 8th. Why did he go to this guy? That's what you're doing. This is who they have. And I don't know where else to turn. I don't know where else they can go, honestly.
Let's pull up this one right here. So we got Ant here. I don't think there was logic to this call, and I defend Buck. Not on this. I want multiple innings out of our best, not the never will be. So
it's a fair criticism.
It's a fair criticism.
Absolutely. But again,
100%.
Where do you go?
Right. So basically, correct me if I'm wrong, Ant. Basically saying like he would much rather run the risk, even if he is tired, rather seeing Robertson out there as opposed to seeing 2 innings of work from Jeff Brigham or seeing more work from Dominic Leone, even though he's been well. But I think that's kind of what's in line with Ant's thought processes there. And if I'm wrong, Ant, please correct me in the comments. But that's the way I'm seeing it. But I think it's just barren of talent. That's really what it comes down to.
He said this earlier. Ant Rivera did in response to who's more fried, the pitchers or the fans, that Keith brought up. He said, pitchers come and go. We are forever.
Very true.
But that's also a pretty appropriate follow-up to what he said about pitching these guys. David Robertson is not a guy that you have a ton invested in terms of years and money. He's not a young pitcher that you're trying to coddle. Now, I'm not saying you pitch him till he's hurt. I don't mean that, but pitch him. Pitch him and pitch him and pitch him and pitch him. Because, like he says, win today and live to see tomorrow. And that's, I understand it's a delicate balance. I understand that's the dance, right? And I understand if you don't want to defend Buck's logic there, like he so astutely put out. But I just don't know where else they can go, Ibby, because here's the thing. Robertson's been good, very good. If you burn him out and he's no longer good, are you better then? Then what? Then where do you go? Then you got Brigham closing games. You got Drew Smith closing games. Not to mention that right now, because of Drew Smith, the Mets are down a roster spot. They're down a bullpen arm. So I don't know, man. I don't know what they're going to do. Honestly, Ibby, I don't know. For the first time all season, I don't have anything good to say about this team. I think it's still early
not much
enough.
To say.
No, I do. Listen, I don't want to be wishy-washy. I think it's still mathematically early enough that you don't write off teams at this point. But have they shown me anything that makes me think they could go on a run like the Phillies last year, like the Braves in 21, like the Nationals in 19, like the Cardinals did against us in 06, hell, like the 69 Mets did? No, they have not shown me anything that they can do that. And that's the frustrating part, because they have not shown me anything. When you look at them and you watch them like you do and I do and everybody in this chat does and everybody who watches us and everybody who listens to us on Premier Podcast Network, everyone. When you watch them, Ibby, they look like a bad baseball team.
They do.
They look like a bad team.
And I can't remember, and I would love to give credit to the person I saw who put this out on Twitter, but the difference year over year is very stark when you see a team that, and we talked about it last week a little bit with Carson, talking about how, stability with Buck and things like that, accountability that was brought in, not wanting to be the dysfunctional team that this team is often viewed as. But when you look at last year, it was built on fundamentals. It was built on keeping the ball in front of you. It was built on moving a guy over. It was built on those principles, and they went out and they executed. This year, it's a completely different team in terms of that execution, and I don't understand why. It's bizarro Mets. It's very weird that everything that they were atoned to seems. And I agree, Keith. That's a big point that I was going to bring up later on in the show. Just like this team lacks something. I don't know what something is. And again, when you talk about the it factor, it's something that you say. They just have it. This team does not have it. Mm-hmm. Something is missing, whether it's character related, whether it's heart related. Something is not there in comparison to last year. And we talked about it last week, whether that's age, whether that's just, players just not having it, losing it over time, not as good as they were, whatever it may be. But, we could talk about this in the second half of the show if you want to, but I think that we're at a point, and yes, it's early in terms of, mathematically, nothing is over until the math says it's over, right? But I really feel, and this is me speaking, I'm not speaking for John. This is just me speaking from when I watch this team. I think it seriously needs to be said when you look in the mirror, whether you are Steve Cohen, whether you are Billy Epler, whoever it may be, you look in the mirror and you say, what exactly is this team? And am I going to bank on this team being able to go where I thought they could in the beginning of the season? Or am I really going to start thinking, maybe this isn't it. Maybe we got to shake things up a little bit and sell some pieces off.
Yeah.
That's how I feel when I watch this team, because I'm sorry. To me, it's not there. It's not there.
I agree. Look, we could keep talking about this, but I think if we do, we'll get in the weeds. We're at 32 minutes. Let's head into the break, and we'll come out of the break talking about this same conversation. Usually we like to put things to bed and kind of come out of the break with a new perspective, but I think this is a new thought. And so let's head into the break on that. For everybody watching live for the first time, or if you've forgotten, the break is just a 10-second ad spot that we need to use for the audio version of this show. So don't go anywhere. John Sapanaro, Matt Ibby Ibanez, Till Mets Do Us Part. We'll be right back. Yo, just like that, we are back live on YouTube, live on Twitter with Till Mets Do Us Part. John Sapanaro, Matt Ibby Ibanez, and of course, watching us live on YouTube is the best way to interact with the show because your questions, your comments, your concerns, and there's a lot of those last ones, come in real time. We can see them. You become a full-fledged member of the show. And even if you're just providing us with a little bit of a reminder, like Stevie Mac always says, hit the like button. If you like what you're watching, you like what you're hearing, go ahead and hit the like button because it helps the algorithm. But we understand that not everybody can watch live all the time. Some people, they'll watch some of it live and then they'll pick it up later on. And you can do that because as soon as we're done with this broadcast, the show will live forever on our YouTube channel, which is appropriately called Till Mets Do Us Part. Best way to make sure you never miss an episode is to subscribe and turn notifications on. That's a key component, especially when we're running parallel with the Mets game and we're not exactly sure what time we're going to be on sometime after it's over. That's a good way to make sure you never miss anything. And of course, if you can't do any of that, you can listen to us starting tomorrow morning. The entire show drops as an audio podcast, courtesy of and on the Premier Podcast Network. Keep all of that in mind. We got Subway to Shea and Rivera saying, thank you, gentlemen. Have you live on at the airport. Appreciate
Where you
that.
going, Ant? Where you
going? And if you want to tell us and, have a safe trip wherever it is you're going. I know what that airport.
Stay out of the Delta Lounge like John hangs out. You'll start fighting people on Twitter.
listen, the Delta Lounge is what keeps me sane fighting people on Twitter. I start fighting people on Twitter until I've had a couple old fashions for free. And then all of a sudden, nothing really bothers me. He is headed to one of the best places in the country.
Oh, nice.
New Orleans, Louisiana. Nice. I love New Orleans. It is an absolute wonderful, wonderful place. This time of year, very hot. This time of year it's great if you like air and you want to grab some of that air and take it with you into your hotel room or maybe out to dinner, because you can reach out and grab it. That's how thick it is. That said, and if you need some recommendations for food or drink, I have a few. You can reach out to me privately and I will tell you some good ones to hit up while you're in New Orleans. I absolutely love that place. That said, Ibby, when we went in from the break, you said that, this team is showing you nothing in terms of that they're the team that can turn this around.
Yeah.
And I agree. And the comments are saying there's no urgency. There's no it factor. There's no, I would take it further and say this team has no identity. What does this team do? Right? Because some of those things are intangible, right? When a team is losing, they always look nonchalant. They always look like they're not being urgent, especially when a team isn't hitting. That's always the adage when it comes to baseball. It factor. Well, and I agree. Just by the way, I agree that there's no urgency right now, but I'm just saying that's something that looks often when a team, even if a really good team is having a 10-game stretch where they're 3-7, all of a sudden it's like, oh, there's no urgency. It's like, let's slow down. But right now, I agree that that's fair. I also agree that there's no it factor to this team. There's no swagger, but that's a hard thing to quantify. What I think is easier to quantify is the fact that this team has no identity. They haven't had an identity all season. Last year, they had an identity. They pitched really well in the starting rotation. Their late inning relief, led by Edwin Diaz, was absolutely lights out, and they hit in the clutch. That was their identity. That's what they
worked
did.
They worked the count.
Exactly. Keith Blacknick with a great comment saying this team's identity was the payroll. And maybe that's
a great comment.
Maybe that's not the problem, right? Because we're all ecstatic. Like, spend the money.
No, of course,
right?
spend the money.
We went from the Wilpons, who were literally cheap and then actually cash poor, to having the richest owner in the sport. Spend the money. Go get everybody. I don't care who you get. Go get them. But it seems like they stopped short, like we talked about last week. There was no Andrew Chafin. There was no, people said about Trevor Williams and Seth Lugo and these other guys. They said it in the comments last week. They've said it in the comments this week. Ibby, look, I don't think that anybody would have been satisfied if the Mets didn't get Verlander and we're making Seth Lugo a starter. I don't think anybody would have been satisfied with that. But I think plenty of people would have been satisfied with, hey, we got Verlander and we're keeping Seth Lugo.
Yeah.
Hey, we got Verlander, we got Senga, we got Quintana, we're bringing back Carrasco, we've got McGill, we've got Peterson, Joey Lucchese's coming back, but you know what? We also brought back Seth Lugo, or we also brought back Trevor Williams. Now, I have problems with Trevor Williams from a personal perspective of the stuff that he said about pride, but this is a baseball show, so I'm going to leave it just as a baseball perspective. And so I think that they still kind of came up a little bit short, and we're seeing those shortcomings now. Right? On the flip side of it, everybody wanted to jettison half the starting team out. They wanted DFA this guy, cut this guy sucks, this guy's a scrub, this guy can't hit anymore. And now you look, now the team has actual depth on the offensive side, right? If Vogelback hits, and Canna hits, and Pham hits, and all these guys hit, well, now it looks like a team that's pretty deep in the starting lineup, and the guys on the bench. They don't have a lot of dead weight right now. They're really not carrying much. But in the rotation and in the bullpen, they're so thin, and they have nowhere to go when it doesn't work.
A thing that has to be said also is, look, I mean, I don't want to speculate too much on the things that have been said by someone like Nightingale, talking about, Stearns and potential tampering, all that nonsense that was posted. He posted as if it was legit. Other people it's murmurs that are being talked about potentially, but trying to eliminate that. But we all know that was a potential outcome. As early as last year, we were thinking about that. But if one thing needs to be said when it comes to Billy Epler, when you look at his time that was spent in Los Angeles. His biggest problem was he couldn't establish. Anaheim. Sorry, Anaheim. The one thing he couldn't do when he was in Anaheim was establish pitching.
Mhm.
Pitching was always his problem when he was in Anaheim. So he comes here, and I think I'm pretty sure I said this on the show when Max was signed, and I said he's attacking things that he felt, he being Epler, that he felt were ready made. Meaning, I know who Max Scherzer is. I know what I can expect from him. So if I sign him, I know that I could get a guy that can pitch to a sub 3 ERA and win 15 games. Something I didn't have in Anaheim. I know
no confidence in his ability to identify somebody for cheaper that might be as good or better.
Correct. So that's where, and that's kind of where this team is right now in terms of not being able to identify. I brought up a Zach Eflin last week. And again, a lot of the guys that did sign elsewhere went to places that do pull out the best out of pitchers like Tampa, like Houston, like Cleveland, like San Francisco. They get these guys, and San Francisco, Alex Cobb pitching great this year. Anthony DeSclafani pitching great this year. It's like these places know what they're doing, but the Mets are really struggling in terms of finding people, and the people that they opt to use. And that's a whole nother conversation. We talked about Jeremy Hefner last week, and I know you put out some tweets this week as well with a huge back and forth that you were having. But those are questions that need to be asked. And I think anything's going to happen in season for this team in terms of that? No, I think that's clearly an off-season change. Let someone finish something out. But I do believe, and again, depending on how things shake out as we get closer to the deadline, I do believe that unless this team gets to a point where they rattle off, and I said this is very hard to believe that they can, but if they rattle off 15 out of 20, if they did something like that to get themselves back into, a little bit of a respectable range to be a buyer at the deadline, outside of that happening, I do not think that this team is going to be trading anybody.
Yeah.
Anybody of substance, because I think, and I know you've said something along these lines on Twitter when you talked about, you can't do something, and I agree with you. You can't do something with the thought process of somebody else being there because you don't know if that person will be there. You can hear all the rumors you want about David Stearns. You don't know if that is going to happen. So you cannot handcuff someone in a situation. And I agree with that. But I also think if something is going to come into question, whether it's Stearns or somebody else, if you want to go somewhere else, right, I do think shackles would be put on a person to say, hey, we're either selling or you are giving away bare minimum because you're not going to touch anything from AA up. I do think like something like that could happen because they need to continue to replenish said minors. And I'll get into more of that, but I'll throw it to you first.
No, listen, I agree with that. Patty and NYC saying, interesting, Ibby. I didn't know that with regards to Billy Epler and his past issues. Keith with another great comment. Epler gave Harvey $13 million on his downward slide. Another great point there. Following it up by saying, this is Keith as well, Keith Blacknick. Mets have to reevaluate their whole pitching system again from the minors to the majors. They haven't had anyone really solid in years from the organization itself, which is another fair point.
Very true.
I think a lot of what you said is spot on. I think Billy Epler's lack of confidence from his past failures of being able to develop and or identify low to acquire pitching has shown its ugly head here. I think it's reared its ugly head because no one is going to and I think you're playing Monday morning quarterback, revisionist history if you sit there and you say, no, I never wanted Max Scherzer. You wanted Max Scherzer to pair with Jacob deGrom.
Yes.
People say, no, I never wanted Justin Verlander. No, you wanted Justin Verlander after deGrom left. We all did, because this is not the Mets signing Michael Kadire. This is the Mets going out and getting two guys who, while older, were at the top of their game still. The Mets weren't paying these guys for things they did ages ago. This is not when they traded and took on Robinson Cano, where he had a downturn and he had the steroid suspension. This is getting Max Scherzer coming off a great year. This is Justin Verlander coming off one of his best years at 39 years old. So you would sit there and you would say these guys are must-gets, and I'm happy that our rich owner threw money at them to go get them. But like the comment said before with Trevor Williams and Seth Lugo, like you mentioned with Zach Eflin and Nate Eovaldi and some of the other, Michael Wacha, who was here and is now a different kind of pitcher, the Mets have not shown any ability to identify one of those guys and bring them here and have them succeed, which does bring me to my point, Ibby, that I mentioned last week that I said on Twitter. I think the bell has tolled for Jeremy Hefner. I don't know what Jeremy Hefner does well. Douglas Barnes asked us in the comments, he's not here today, he asked us in the comments last week, and he asked me on Twitter to identify and talk about, and we won't do it today, the things that Buck Showalter does well as a manager. The reason why I say we won't do it today is because I don't think this past week has been, Buck Showalter's been the biggest problem, plus Douglas Barnes isn't here to get the answer to his own question. So we'll hold it off. We could talk about that whenever, right? And from Subway to Shea saying, I wanted Bassett back, right? I think when you look at Jeremy Hefner, I did not want Verlander. I was adamant about that. I saw how Scherzer broke down at the end of the season. I didn't want another 40-year-old. That's fair.
And to before I just cut you off real quick, to Ant's point, I have the DMs. I still have them because we have a long conversation that I had with Ant, and he's not lying. He was, what had happened around that time, he was very uneasy about it, but as everyone could be at that point because of the age. And then when you become a Met, it's like you hope for the best. But to Ant's credit, and I'll back him up here, he did say, I don't feel good about having Justin Verlander because of X, Y, and Z, like he mentioned right there.
That's a fair point. You're putting a lot of eggs in an old basket, or you're putting old eggs in a big basket, however you want to twist the analogy to make it make sense for their age, right? I understand that perspective, right? And I'm not saying that no one ever said that, right? I was hyperbole when I said most people are like, look, I'm happy we're spending money. We had a need at the top of the rotation. We addressed it in the best way we possibly could. It's a short-term deal, and it fills the void of a necessary ace. That's my point. My point on Hefner is twofold. My point on Hefner, and I brought this up last week, and I brought it up on Twitter. Who has Jeremy Hefner made better that wasn't already good somewhere else? I don't think the answer is anybody. Now, I got into a back and forth with somebody on Twitter because they said, you can't blame Hefner for Scherzer and for Verlander because they're old. I don't agree with that. Now, do I think that the pitching coach is going to help Justin Verlander after 20 years be better? No, but I think the pitching coach sometimes can be there to say, hey, you're tipping this pitch or you're throwing this one differently or whatever. I think you can make tweaks. And I also think a pitching coach can be interfering to the sense where you might make a guy worse. Now, do I think that's the biggest point? Do I think that Max and Verlander are listening to Jeremy Hefner and that's why they haven't been good? No, Ibby. But what I'm looking at is two all-time great pitchers having currently the collective worst seasons they've ever put forth under this pitching coach. That's an indictment on the pitching coach. It's also an indictment on the pitching coach when no one else gets better. The same guy argued with me, well, what about Tyler McGill? He was good under Hefner at first. Peterson was good under Hefner at first. Well, they're young pitchers. They're much more impressionable. What if under the tutelage of Jeremy Hefner, they changed some things, tweaked some things? Hell, Carson said it last week. They took him from a guy who was living north-south to just a mediocre pitcher who lives left-right, and he gets bombed. He's a sinker-slider guy instead of being a guy who throws 97, 98 up in the zone for Tyler McGill. To me, that's a pitching philosophy thing. That's a pitching coach thing. Jeremy Hefner has to answer for that. And then when you go back to the comment from Subway to Shea saying, I wanted Bassett back. Now, look, I'm not going to put everything on Jeremy Hefner. But, Ibby, if you're Jeremy Hefner, if you're the pitching coach of a team that wins 101 games and you've got a guy like Bassett who's got a track record and you want him back, you don't lobby to get him back. You don't say, hey, look, I know he folded for us in the last 2 starts of the season, one in the postseason, one before that, and he wasn't great. And I know he made some comments about the COVID vaccine that we all don't like, but the guy's a bulldog. The guy eats innings. The guy's a good pitcher. I'd like him back. Now, maybe he did that, but I just feel like you have to be a little bit more. Someone has to be held accountable for this. Mm-hmm. And Ant saying Hefner has no impact on the vets. I look at him through McGill, Peterson, and even Drew Smith, who have all taken a step back. I understand that. Again, I'm not saying that this stuff behind the scenes didn't happen. I'm not saying he didn't lobby for this guy and they were just like, no, we're not bringing him back anyway. Or, let us make the front office decisions. Your job is to coach them. I don't know. We're not in the clubhouse. We're not in the locker room. We don't know what conversations happen. And I admit that guys like Justin Verlander and Max Scherzer don't rely on their pitching coach. They're their own pitching coaches for the most part. It's the same way Peyton Manning was his own offensive coordinator. But when you are having the 2 worst years of your career for each one of them, and other guys have regressed, and other guys that people wanted to keep weren't kept, I think it's not one thing. I think if it's just one, you can argue it away. But I think when you start to lump all of these things together, it becomes a pattern of behavior where the pitching coach and or the Mets' top to bottom pitching philosophy, like Keith brought up earlier, has failed them. And when that happens, the pitching coach needs to go.
I really think that we are close. And I still question if things will happen in season. But I really do feel that we are close in terms of a clear out. I really do. I feel that way. And I don't like saying things like that based off of a bad stretch, but this isn't a stretch. This is a season at this point. Like, this is a bad season. It clearly is. And like you said, nothing's over till mathematics say it's over. But I really think that we're at a point where a lot of things that we just mentioned are not going to fall on deaf ears because it's things that anybody can see. So I'm assuming the people that matter also see these things, and these questions also come about, and something that even Steve Cohen could potentially look at and say, well, why are we not getting better here? Or why are we failing here? Why has this been something almost that it's considered systemic? Why are we not getting better? Maybe we need to change something. Maybe something new needs to be, maybe a new thought process, like anything along those lines. I feel like we are on the potential cusp of a change happening. Now, I think it's more likely to happen in the offseason, but
but let me ask you a question. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
No, it's fine.
I just want to ask you point blank.
Yeah.
I think it would be the way this has been. I think it's criminal if they don't make a change in season. I'm not saying it has to happen tomorrow, but can they, with this team underachieving the way that they have for as long as they have from just the starting pitching perspective,
right?
You think they can sell Jeremy Hefner through the end of the season when, like Ant Rivera says, Hefner's been here since 2020, since the Rojas days. It's time. I'm asking you. I'm not asking what you think they're going to do. I'm saying if it were you, if you were Billy Epler, would you make this change?
I would. And the reason why I would goes back, and I can find the clip if I have to, but I said on this show, I said when the new staff was coming in, I said to you, I go, they're bringing they were letting a lot of people go because it was the off season and they weren't retaining coaches, but they were making it a point to keep Jeremy Hefner. And I said on this show to you, I go, I don't know how I feel about this, mainly because when you bring in new people, I think they should pick their staff. I think they should have
and you said
point blank who they want.
Sandy Alderson. You also just said it from a feel and vibes perspective. You were like, look, you changed the owner, the Wilpons are gone, rip out the Wilpon roots. You said rip out Sandy Alderson, rip out Louis Rojas, rip out Jeremy Hefner. Anybody who was here, get them gone. You
there's
said
no
that. You did. I remember.
there's no point in thinking that, oh well, if we just bring them in with these new people, it'll work. It's just like sometimes it doesn't. And look, do I think that whoever Buck would have picked would have been, the greatest thing ever? I have no idea. But the point is, when someone comes in, I never like the idea of someone being told, "Oh, by the way, you're working with this person." It's like, I don't think that's the way you should handle something. I say the same thing in football too.
Yeah.
When a head coach or when a GM comes in, like, oh, you got to keep the head coach, or vice versa. Like, I never understood, like, that's not how you build a team. Like, you're trying to build a camaraderie to build
Absolutely.
something proper. And I think that, like, but again, I'm not describing this as, oh my God, there's like, it's just hitting heads between Buck and Hefner. It's not that. It's just more so, I didn't like it from the jump in terms of how it looks when you are trying to build it. I've never liked that. If something changes, you take everything out and you start new.
I agree with you. I think the only way, and this is kind of similar to what we talked about with Vogelback last week. I think the only time that can work is if you have a guy who's so proven and so entrenched that you're like, look, man, we've got Rex Ryan Rex Ryan, the defensive coordinator of the Super Bowl winning Baltimore Ravens here. We can't let Rex Ryan go. You're going to have to try to make this work. If you have, what's his name? Leo Mazzoni, right? The guy with the Braves all those years.
Yeah.
If you have him, now obviously he had 3 Hall of Fame pitchers. Let's, not minimize that. But you have a guy with that kind of track record of success where you're like, okay, look, this guy is churning out pitcher after pitcher after pitcher. We bring in a new head coach. We bring in a new manager. We're going to segue this guy over for a little while. I have no beef with that. But when you look at Hefner, and I will admit, at the time, I sort of disagreed with you. I was like, I think Hefner's done enough to stay at that time. Mm-hmm. I think Hefner was the one guy. But now that ship has sailed. You know what I mean? Like, these guys don't need an infinite amount of leeway. These guys don't need, like, oh my God, how could you possibly get rid of Jeremy Hefner in season? What has he done? Right. What has he built? Who is he? What's his resume? He's not even an all-time great Met or an all-time great pitcher. And I know that doesn't matter because sometimes great coaches aren't great pitchers and, all of that. But I just don't know what he's done where you could sit there and say, you know what? We're not going to get rid of him right now. We're not going to make that change. And to your comment about the thing with Buck, who knows who Buck would have brought in, right? He could have brought in the worst pitching coach in the world, could have brought in the best. But the track record so far, Ibby, is actually one that's pretty good, right? Like, Eric Chavez, good hitting coach last year. Eric Chavez, I know the bench coach has like a larger role, but a smaller role in terms of what the fans see in the day-to-day. But him getting elevated to bench coach is obviously a good sign for what the Mets think of him. Now, everybody wanted to take Hinsky and Jeremy Barnes to task because of how bad the offense was. Well, the hitting doesn't look so bad right now.
Right. And
so those guys showing to be pretty good. First base coach, not a huge deal, but no issues there. I know, Cora's had his ups and downs at third base, but I wouldn't say he's the most egregious hire. So, like, when you look at the rest of Buck's staff, I think the guy who's been the biggest problem is Jeremy Hefner, who wasn't a part of Buck's staff.
Right. And then, of course, like there's always going to be the retort to that and simply saying, I know that the person that you were having your back and forth with was saying this as well. It's like, well, it also comes down to talent, which then is an indictment on Billy Epler and saying you're not bringing in the proper people and things like that. So, and then it's like you're bringing in the wrong types of people to work with this type of pitching, like whatever it may be. There's always going to be, a finger to point at someone. But like I said, I just think that if it was me, I think that you're at a point now where you can drop the hammer and throw blame and have someone fall on that sword to try and shake something up to see if it wakes anybody up. I do think that should happen. But like I said before, I think that as much as Steve Cohen, comes off as a no nonsense, I'm going to get the best of the best, I still think that there is a little bit of, you know, not being too trigger happy, if you will, to pull on something that he might think is the improper time because it comes off as dysfunction. Now, granted, I know someone brought up, might have been Mark Healy today, talking about how he fired, or Chili Davis got fired 22 days into the season or something along those lines. Maybe that was the outlier. I don't know, because for the most part, it's kind of been steady ever since, because I think you want to allow things to play out before you make a call. And I get that to an extent, but like I said, I think we're at a point now in the season where it's like, you've seen it. It's time to change. Time to change things up.
We got a lot of great comments coming in. Carson, who was a guest on the show last week, says, me just coincidentally rendering a Jeremy Hefner clip right now as we started talking about Jeremy Hefner a few minutes ago. And then just a couple of things I want to address that Keith brings up that are all true, or true as we know it. He said Alderson had been out of touch for a while. The only reason why he was brought in originally was because the MLB didn't trust the Wilpons to make good baseball moves after Madoff. Yes, totally know that, totally understood. And he followed that up by saying, rumors are he came in with Cohen was because he was going to be a good buffer with the other teams and GMs. Correct. And I think that's understood as well. I think that's a rumor that's sort of, the worst kept secret. I think he was in the organization in a small silent role. And it was like, look, there's a guy who's coming in that's not an old school baseball guy in terms of ownership. He's not a part of the club. Well, who is? Sandy Alderson. So I even said that at the time as a rebuttal to you. I defended it because I was like, look, this makes sense. And he might only be here for a year, and that's basically what happened. And so, Keith, both of those points well taken, but I figured I should bring them up for maybe anybody who's maybe a younger Mets fan, or a younger listener or viewer of this show that might be watching or listening, whatever the case may be, that said, oh, well, what's the deal with that? Those are two really astute points and observations from the Mets' recent past. But then here's a couple other good ones that really, really kind of stick with everything we're talking about. Carson said, I didn't like them keeping Rojas in the first year of Cohen either. That 2021 team didn't need a player friend like Rojas was. This is the same deal here. And then Ant from Subway to Shea saying, the Mets have never cleaned house fully, like ever. They kept Bobby V, got rid of his staff. They kept the staff before they brought in Willie Randolph. They've never done a clean sweep. And he followed it up by saying even Dan Worthen stayed between Jerry Manuel into Terry Collins. So in their recent past, they have never really done this clean sweep of the organization. And I think, look, I'm not saying the Mets won 101 games last year with Jeremy Hefner as the pitching coach. Nobody's saying that the Mets have, there's some kind of voodoo hex from the Wilpons on this team that until they fully clean house, it's not going to be better, or they can never have any kind of success or anything. But honestly, Ibby, I know this is the second time I'm bringing it up, but as a Jets fan, this is something the Jets have notoriously done up until they gave Joe Douglas full autonomy.
Right.
Prior to giving him autonomy, there was a lot of, hey, I'm Woody Johnson. I'm going to hire the coach. The coach and the GM both report to me. Nobody has any, kind of authority over the other person. Then, oh, by the way, we've got a guy who I fired once who's now been brought back. He's going to be a scout. A guy who used to be a GM. He's a scout. It was a fucking mess. It was an absolute mess. It's kind of like, but not as dramatic as the Moneyball scene where you got these old school guys and the analytics guys butting heads as far as the scouting goes. Now, I think that's overblown because I think analytics are important. I think advanced statistics are important. I also think routine statistics are important. And I also think the eye test and the gut matters. So I think there's a place for all of that in baseball. But I do think there's something to be said when you don't rip it out at the root. It allows it to take seed again. That's just how it happens. And so I think that's, I don't know. I just think there's always a way that you could point to it, at least from a PR perspective or a bad taste perspective. If Jeremy Hefner wasn't here with the Wilpons, you could sit here and go, oh man, I don't know. Jeremy Hefner's probably got to go, but it's his first year. I'm not sure, like whatever. But now you can harken back and go, well, he was here, or this, like, you know what I mean? It's just, it's really easy to have that stink and that stench be permeating through what is the current team. Carson saying McGill was the last straw for me. He had a chance to be an ace by adding velocity. The fact that they got scared of a 27-year-old not staying healthy is nuts, given their high veteran trust on this team. So, that's something that he said last week when he was on the show as well.
Mm-hmm.
And, I think that's fair, man. It's something we addressed earlier.
Well taken. Yes.
So
100%.
Look, we're over an hour. Go ahead.
Yeah. No, I mean, the other thing I just wanted to say, because it's been on my mind, is just like I have been saying from the jump when Steve Cohen came in and talking about the Dodger model and all this stuff. So I want to make sure that this doesn't get misconstrued or whatever. It's like, I knew that this was going to be a process. Okay. I think some people may get lost in the 101 wins because, look, I don't think any of us really thought 101 was what was going to happen last year. But the point is, it did.
You can make a case they arrived too early.
Right. And the thing I'm just getting at is I always understood that this was going to be a process. It doesn't mean you can't be frustrated along the way with a process because, again, I had been saying when you look back at that Dodger model, now, granted, you have to have the right people in place to build everything from the inside out. But when you look back on it, they spent a lot of money, like this team has, spent a lot of money, put players on the field that fans could be, up for, they respect, they know what they are, kind of with the players like they've signed. Same thing the Dodgers did back then. And it lets them be competitive to a point where you're still basically packing the stadium. Like that's the whole idea, because you're basically
the Dodgers
saying,
had a lot of not so great years. They had a lot of disappointing seasons during that early part of the build after McCourt.
Right. So when you look at that, and I believe that might have been, was that, you would know better than me, was that the time, I believe, when it was like the Adrian Gonzalez, Carl Crawford types? I think that was, So taking those guys on, all that money, hey, they're going to come here, change the scenery, it's going to be better or whatever. And it doesn't really work out, but they're playing okay ball. It's kind of what the Mets are doing here. It's a process. And I'm not saying don't be upset. I'm not saying don't want more, because we want competitiveness. We want to be a better team. So I'm not using this as a scapegoat or anything, but I'm just saying, like, this is part of this process, and it sucks because you thought, based off of how this team is, because it does have a blend of youth on the offensive side in comparison to what those Dodgers teams were doing, but it's still going to take a little bit of time. So I'm not saying this to like just be like, oh, like be happy or whatever, but understand like this whole thing is a process, and it is frustrating. I understand it 1000%, but this is part of this retooling, if you will. The question though remains, are the proper people in place to allow this process to be on the right track so you do get to that point? That's still up for debate, but I just want to say, like, this is really part of the beginning parts of that Dodger build.
Yeah. I listen, I agree with that. For the first time, probably since Cohen has taken over and fully entrenched himself. That first year was for everything that we're talking about, Alderson and Rojas and all this stuff. That was kind of a transitionary year. For the first time since Cohen has put his full-fledged stamp on this team, I'm not sure. I don't want to get into speculation. This is an off-season conversation about Stearns and things like that. But I think it's possible. I think he would be a good addition. I love Stearns. I think the Mets should have never let him go. The only reason why he left was because Jeff Wilpon wouldn't pay him like an extra $50,000 a year. Omar Minaya loved him. Omar Minaya loved Stearns. He came up as an intern basically, and he was like, "This guy's good. Got to keep him in the organization. Want to elevate him." And Jeff was like, "No,
get rid of him.
No, I know better. So I won't." And then he left, and he became the guy, who he became. And it's frustrating to watch that happen. I just want to say this, Ibby, before we get out of here. A lot of times I defend across the board. I will defend a player and say that their salary is irrelevant to their production.
Correct.
And I stand by that. I think that so many things dictate a player's salary that they get. It's the time of the free agency. It's supply and demand. It's where the market is going. It's where the market has been.
A lot of variables.
It's past performance for sure, but past performance can be a somewhat indicator or a barometer of future performance, but we've seen that time and time again, not always, right? So that's why I think a player's contract is not a problem unless they're unrosterable. And the example I always use is Chris Davis on the Baltimore Orioles.
Right.
If Chris Davis is paid to be a superstar, linchpin, home run hitter in the middle of your lineup, batting 3, batting 4, doing all the things that Chris Davis was known for doing before his career fell off a cliff, and all of a sudden he's batting 128 and hits 9 home runs in the course of a season, well, he's unrosterable. He's not a major league player. Then the fact that you gave him a 10-year deal or whatever money they gave him, that is backbreaking. So I say that to say this. I do not feel the same way, or rather, I do not give the same leeway to an entire team's payroll. Mm-hmm. And with that, I say, when you have spent this much money, and I'm not begrudging them for doing it. I think it's smart as hell. I told you that all offseason that their payroll was going to be the highest in baseball. It was going to be super high. It was going to approach $400 million. I told you that. So I'm happy they did it. But when your payroll is this high as a team, you cannot be 6 games under 500 almost in July. You can't.
Agreed.
And that's where it shifts for me. Because if you're spending that much money, by accident, you should be mediocre. By accident, you should be in the conversation for the playoffs. You should just have enough guys on your team that are doing well enough at baseball in any given sample size where you could be in. You don't have to be the best team in baseball because money doesn't buy championships. I'm not saying you have to win more games than anybody's ever won and walk to the World Series. I'm just saying when your payroll is this high, Ibby, you should be at least over 500 and in the conversation for the wild card more than the Mets are right now. And that's my final point for this, is that you can't have money up here and performance down here. That is embarrassing and infuriating.
And I back you on that because it goes hand in hand with my thought process as to where this team is and why they need to look in the mirror and say, what needs to be done here? Should we sell off certain pieces to try and retool a little bit, whether that is to help now or better ourselves moving forward? Those are things that need to be said because I think that goes hand in hand with everything that you just said.
Yeah, I
Simple
mean,
as that.
Listen, that seems like another conversation that I don't want to start because we're at
the
end.
No, of course not.
But that is something that, look, Ibby, I got to be honest with you. I hope that's a conversation we don't have to have in a couple weeks. I really do. Mm-hmm. As a Mets fan, as somebody that loves this team and watches this team every day and roots for this, like I hope that's not a conversation we have to have. I hope they find a way to turn it around where they at least can, buy at the deadline in a way that doesn't hurt them long term. Buy a relief pitcher or two, or something that your boy has been putting out on Twitter the whole time where you say, hey, you know what? We'll trade a prospect for somebody that's going to help us now and help us in the future. We'll get a Shane Bieber. We'll get a Corbin Burns. We'll go get a player like that who can help us today, but also helps us down the road. Right. So you're not mortgaging your future. You're just moving the pieces around on the chessboard.
Right.
I'm hoping they put themselves in a position. Right now, they're not in that position. Right now, they're down bad, and they should be sellers if this continues. But my question is, or my problem is, and this is where we can end it and kind of, save this for a couple weeks.
Yeah.
Maybe I don't know who they have to sell. Who are they selling? If Verlander's not Verlander and Scherzer's not Scherzer, who are they selling on this team?
I think if someone is willing to eat money to get something, I think that they could move people if they really wanted to. And if someone was willing to take on a player, if you give money, I always think that is, if someone's willing to take on, if someone is willing to pay the money to put someone on another team, if it means give me a B-level, B-minus level prospect, I think that this team can do that. So do I think players like that, we don't want it to happen, but do I think it can happen with players the ilk of a Max or a JV or a Marte or
I suppose that's true.
Like that's the way I would look at that. But we can revisit this in a couple of weeks and we can see what's going on and we can see whatever happens.
In fairness, this is a good comment from a few people have said this, but Ant Rivera summing it all up. Canna, Escobar, Pham, Vogelback, Robertson, and Carrasco all have expiring contracts. Expiring contracts usually, more of a term that you hear with the NBA in terms of making deals, but that is a term that I think applies in this instance where a team is taking them on for not a lot. You're talking about a guy like Mark Canna makes $10 million. Well, you trade him with half the season to go. He's probably got a $4.5 million salary at the trade deadline.
Right.
So this is a team that, hey, we need a right-handed stick. He plays first. He could DH. He could play right. He could play left. Fine. Stevie Mack saying Pham will definitely have a market, sort of a la the Marlon Byrd deal, something like that. I think that is all possible. And Ant Rivera saying, you might not get a lot, but you'll get something. I think that's fair.
Hey, but even if that's the case,
it does free up room. You trade Escobar, you trade Canna. Next thing you know, Vientos and Mauricio are on this team.
And if we talk about it all, it's been a theme of this episode. Like, there's no depth in the minors. You need depth pieces. So if that brings depth guys, doesn't hurt.
Right.
Helps the system.
Yeah, that's
not everyone always assumes that you have to get superstars down low. Everyone wants to be the Dodgers where they just constantly recycle all these guys that everybody wants. It takes time to get there, but you need to have bodies that you can rotate in and out at the minor league level. Not everyone's a star, but serviceable people. That's what you need.
Keith Blagnick saying Marlon Byrd trade on his t-shirt night. That's right. I forgot about that.
That's right. That's right.
Ibby, let me ask you a question. Speaking of the Dodgers, it's totally off topic, but the Dodgers traded Yordan Alvarez, one of the best power hitters in baseball. Didn't they trade him for like Jeremy Hellickson or something? They got like
I don't remember the actual
I don't
deal,
know if it's Hellickson. It's a guy like that. And if anybody remembers, Ant Rivera might remember, Subway Shea, Carson might remember. It's a player that was like it's a Band-Aid player. It's basically it's the Fernando Tatis Jr. for James Shields trade. That's what this is.
Yeah.
And I think it's worse because you like that was. They thought they were getting big game James. You know what I'm saying? They thought they were getting. They thought they were getting James.
It was more like
Shields.
game over James. That's what it was.
Yeah, and it was no game James is what they got. Yeah. But I just remember them getting like it's like a bullpen piece, and I don't know if it's Jeremy Hellickson.
They've given away a lot. But they've given up guys, and it's crazy if they actually didn't what they would be. But that goes to show you the smart people that they have in place over there to find all of this talent. It's pretty incredible.
Thank you, Carson. Thank you for the guy, Josh Fields. Thank you. Sorry to Jeremy Hellickson, but I knew, and right at the same time, they both had it. Subway to Shea. His name escaped me because I knew it was like a guy who was just a guy, right? Like I knew it was like they traded. Like if the Mets made that trade, laughing stock of baseball. The Dodgers make that trade, and they're like, it's cool. We got plenty of guys.
We got 15 other guys.
We got tons of them. We good. We got so many guys we can call up.
Yes, they did. Joe K. They also traded away O'Neal Cruz. So they had O'Neal Cruz and Yordan Alvarez. That's just insane. And when you really look at it, it's nuts.
Yeah, but and Carson following it up by saying, "Guy had such a dead arm, it was a disaster." Meaning Josh Fields. And yes, like I said a moment ago, James Shield for Tatis Jr. I did say that. It was just like. It's mind-blowing, some of these guys, and that's why, anyway, I went off on that tangent, and we'll leave here in a second, but I went off on that tangent, Ibby, because to your point, sometimes you're giving up a guy, or sometimes you're getting a guy back that nobody really knows what he is. Like, the Mets traded R.A. Dickey for Travis d'Arnaud.
Right.
Not really for Noah Syndergaard.
Right.
The Mets liked Syndergaard. The Jays liked Syndergaard, but like that was he was the other guy in the deal. He was the second piece.
He was the throw-in.
And he was arguably the better player. So, and now the hits keep coming. Marcus Simeon for Jeff Samardzija. Yes.
Yep.
We could do this all day, and I appreciate those because they are just the ones. But like, so you never do know. You could sell off, if things go real bad, you could sell off a Tommy Pham to give Ronnie Mauricio his shot. And the guy the Mets get in the deal 3 years from now could be the next David Wright. Like, you have no idea. You have no idea because that's how crazy baseball is. So that said, we started late. We went late. Do you have anything else to say before we get the hell out of here?
No, I just hope that this next week I can actually maybe enjoy watching this team, maybe. But yeah, I mean that's it. I appreciate everyone that comes in here and listens to us. It's fun. This is the fun part, just being able to talk with everyone, have fun like we're doing right now with the chat and stuff like that. But that's what I like. That's what I'm looking forward to next Wednesday. Hopefully, we're talking about some more positive things. But like I said, I'm a little apprehensive to say that. So we'll see what happens. But can't wait to see you all next week. Yay.
Keith saying Syndergaard was a throw-in, and then David Wright throws his lunch in the trash. Always getting thrown. No, so I will say this. I am going to I'm going to be at a couple Mets games coming up, and I just want to be able to enjoy those. I really do. I'm going to the July 4th game in Arizona. And so if anybody's going to be there, wants to say hello. And then later that week, last series before the All-Star break, that Friday, I'm going to the game in San Diego. And those will probably be my last two Mets games of the season that I can get to, barring something unforeseen. So I want to be able to enjoy those. I want to be able to have a good time at those baseball games. I want the Mets to be good enough where it's like, okay, this is enjoyable. Like, you know what I mean? I don't want them to be on this streak of BS that they're in right now, where like those games, like where I regret going. I really just don't want that to be the case. Now, San Diego is a beautiful place. They have a great ballpark. I'm going to enjoy going. I've never been to Chase Field, so that'll be my first time. So that'll be cool. Keith Blacknick saying the pool is fun in Arizona. Maybe I'll do that. Who knows? I don't know if you have to buy tickets for that or whatever. But that's what I'm hoping for. I just want them to be. I want them to be good enough to matter. And last thing, Ibby, for everybody listening and watching, a little bit of programming notes. I don't know when we're going to do the show next week, just so you know. Okay. I will be traveling on Tuesday to Nashville for Monster Jam World Finals, which is like our WrestleMania. Okay. It's not until that Saturday, but all week long, I'm going to be pretty busy. So I don't know if we're going to be able to do a show in our standard way. Might be later, might be earlier, might be different. So again, subscribe, turn those notifications on. Might be Ibby here with a different co-host. We don't know. We don't know yet. So keep all of that in mind. Guys, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for all the comments coming in. Chris Ferraro, we got Anthony from Subway to Shea, Carson, two great creators and podcasters in their own right. We got Keith Blackdick from the QBC. Don't forget about the lunch that Ibby is hosting with Howie Rose. That's going to be absolutely fantastic. Patty and NYC, Stevie Mack, the list goes on and on. We appreciate you guys, especially now. We always do, but especially now as shit has absolutely hit the fan with this team. It's a lot better when we're all talking about it. We're all commiserating and doing the best we can together as a group. And so with that said, if you didn't watch any of this, don't worry. You can listen tomorrow, courtesy of the Premier Podcast Network. John Sapanaro, Matt Ibby Ibanez, Till Mets Do Us Part, and they're really putting that fucking name to the test. We'll see you guys later.